So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, we will be continuing with our tafsir. And of course, we're still on the ayah number 44 in, let's see, Surah Nisa. Of course, ayah number 44 in Surah Nisa, it actually has a lot of rulings, which actually makes it tricky to finish the ayah really quick. But inshallah, we're going to give it the time rather than actually feeling that we have to rush into it. So we did actually start يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تقربوا الصلاة وأنتم سكارى, and guess what? I think this is probably our fourth week, and we are still on the word إلا عابري سبيل حتى تغتسلوا. We left off at these words. Last week we only covered just these two words, and of course I could rush it and just speak about the ayat in just I would say the surface of it, but I think it's not giving the words what they really contain. We're here to learn the words, and since this is actually relating to what is called ayat al-ahkam, the ayat that relate to Islamic rulings, I think it's fair to cover the meanings deeply and not just the surface. And of course, ayat al-ahkam would mean the ayat that relate to Islamic rulings. And the book that we're using is basically called Tafsir al-Qurtubi. Tafsir al-Qurtubi, let me just give you an idea. So this is page 350. Let's actually go back. This is Tafsir al-Qurtubi right there. So something easy for you to see. So Tafsir al-Qurtubi, it's called the Jami' al-Ahkam al-Quran. And you could see it's for al-Qurtubi, Abu Abdullah al-Qurtubi. Ta actually means the year that he had died in. The good news is that this was actually reviewed in where you would have the hadith in place and so forth, which actually makes it easy for us to get to the authenticity of the hadith and so forth. We did last week talk about different topics that relate to entering the masjid, that relate to women on their periods when they enter the masjid. Can they read the Quran and so forth? And what about janaba and what does that actually mean? So if you really wanted to go back to more details in that regards, alhamdulillah, the recording is there and you could actually go to it and find this piece of information on what what al-Qurtubi said. Now, note al-Qurtubi is Maliki madhab, but that's although important to say, but that's not necessarily always what he adopts. So he's not a fanatic madhab, Maliki, so sometimes he will consider the other opinions, number one, and the other madhab as well. And of course, he's not a fanatic Maliki, which is really important because when you're fanatic to a specific madhab, then you are willing to defend your madhab, even if it actually contradicts the evidences that you would see right in front of you. So we also talked about, before that, we said that al-Qurtubi was laying out almost 40 different points that he wanted to say in regards to this ayah. So we are at point 16. So we've got a couple long ways to go, but inshallah we'll continue it. And he talked about how scholars actually had differences of opinions in terms of what is called the takhleel al-lihya. What is takhleel al-lihya? So basically this involves men, when they actually do their wudu, or at least their ghusl, do they necessarily have to make sure that the water had penetrated the different areas within their beard? If they have a bushy beard, do they have to make sure that the water penetrated and just not generally wash their faces? So you could see that he actually said that Malikis actually had differences of opinions. And I would like to say that it's not only Malikis. We usually think that that one madhab only has one opinion. That's actually not the case. So you could have, for example, madhab Hanbali actually have 19 and 20 different opinions in just one madhab, just the madhab Hanbali. In fact, you can even go farther and actually have multiple narrations upon that were mentioned about madhab, about Imam Ahmad himself on what he actually regarded as the preponderant opinion in that. Well, that's the same thing when you're talking about Malik. So you could say there's Ibn al-Qasim. He basically said, well, according to Imam Malik, that his chosen preponderant opinion is that he does not have to basically put his fingers and inside his beard to make sure that all the water had penetrated the different hair follicles and so forth. But you could see another opinion in where Ashab, another scholar, traces back all the way to Imam Malik, and basically one of they trace back in terms of students, of course, that he actually had an opposing opinion in where he said, no, he is supposed to be basically putting his fingers inside his beard and making sure that the water penetrated every single hair follicle within his beard. So that's the thing, is that you could actually have multiple opinions even in one madhab. So of course, the best way to do this is, hey, just stay on the safe side and make sure that the water is penetrating all your beard and not just generally falling in, falling in or on your the hairs on the outside. All right. So why? Because in general, of course, why did we actually consider that as the preponderant? Because he said that استيعاب جميع الجسد في الغسل واجب والبشرة التي تحت اللحية من جملته. He said, well, the reason for that, why he regarded that, hey, doing it is actually obligatory, or at least preponderant, is because the ghusl, the word ghusl, so here it says حتى تغتسلوا, until you would wash. And he said, since washing all the body is obligatory, well, that would actually involve the skin that is underneath the beard, and that it is actually part of the skin and part of the general definition of washing all the body. So therefore, whether you are letting the water flow by letting the water literally flow, or whether you are basically doing your duty to make sure that the water is actually penetrating the different areas in the beard. All right, so this is just an idea of how they would actually mention. We did mention on the the before whether this تحت كل شعرة جنابة, that under each and every single hair there is janaba. Now we talked about janaba last time, so no need to actually go in details with that. And of course, we did mention that this hadith is not necessarily authentic, but that doesn't mean that we are not supposed to be washing all the body. Now let's go for the other piece of it. When we actually speak about ghusl, all right, if we're saying that the outer piece of, let's say, the beard, and also the skin that's underneath the beard is to be washed, do we actually have to wash the inner part of our body? What do we mean, the inner part? Well, things like our mouth, this is washing the inside cavity. Are we supposed to be also washing our nostrils? Well, the question is, it's so easy to just say, just wash it and make the story short. Well, if we are to say that it's obligatory, that would actually mean when you didn't, and you didn't even know that it was obligatory, that actually means all your prayers are actually invalid. You look at the premise. The premise is, if you considered it obligatory, and if it was considered obligatory, that means not doing it would basically result in your salah being invalid, and certainly you cannot enter the masjid. And there's so many different things, well, according to that opinion, okay, and there's so many different things that you were not supposed to be doing. Well, I mean, remember, you've got this opinion right there where it tells you your salah is not, your tahara, your major impurity is not actually valid. Let's see right there. So that is right there. Remember, this is al-Qurtubi. He says, وَقَدْ بَلَغَ قَوْمٌ فَأَوْجَبُوا الْمَضْمَضَةَ وَالْإِسْتِنْشَاقَ. He said, well, some really went too far, and they had regarded that washing the mouth and even washing the nostrils is basically obligatory. And he said, well, the evidence they had depended on was حتى تغتسلوا. He said that that's the opinion of Abu Hanifa, and he regarded that because he regarded that it's basically part of all the face, and therefore it takes the ruling of the face, and therefore it takes the ruling. Same thing as if you were to talk about the cheeks, you're talking about the forehead, then therefore, even if you were to leave a small spot unwashed, that would actually mean that your whole wudu is invalid. Well, let's see how he feels about that opinion. He said, well, Malik actually said, which is the opinion of Imam Maliki, he actually said they're not obligatory, which is washing the mouth and washing the nostrils. He said not in a state of major impurity and certainly not a minor impurity, because they're actually the inside of the body and not the outside of the body. Okay, well, so what does that mean? He said, well, what he was trying to say is that, well, the ayah actually says حتى تغتسلوا, and when it's talking about washing, it's actually talking about washing the outside. It wasn't actually talking washing the inside. So whatever opening inside of you, you're not going to necessarily want to insert water in it. Same thing if you're talking about the ears. Are you going to insert water into your ears because there's a little opening right there? And are you going to be inserting in different areas as well? The answer is, so according to Imam Malik, he said, well, no, the washing is actually involving the outside, not the inside. Now, here's one thing. I want you to look at this word right there. And he said, well, that's Muhammad ibn Jarir al-Tabari, al-Layth ibn Sa'd, and even al-Awza'i had actually also adopted that opinion. I would like to mention, what people don't usually recognize is that al-Tabari, al-Layth ibn Sa'd, and even al-Awza'i were actually as scholarly as Imam Malik, as Abu Hanifa, and as Shafi'i himself. Now, it's really sad that these scholars who actually are a different madhab. In other words, Jarir al-Tabari had his own madhab. We usually know only four madhab, and people would usually know, let's say, Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali. They don't even recognize that actually there are a lot more madhab than that, in where Tabari himself was a madhab. Al-Layth ibn Sa'd was actually a madhab, and so was al-Awza'i. And in fact, there are even more madhab, al-Thawri, ibn Uyayna, there's so many different madhab. So it's not really exclusive to four schools. But the schools that you actually know, those schools, the Hanbali, Maliki, Shafi'i, etc., those schools were the schools that managed to actually have students that documented and really, let's say, put in a foundation for that particular madhab and pretty much made it accessible and known to others later on. So when you're talking about, for example, Abu Hanifa, if it wasn't for Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani, you would really know not much about madhab Hanafi. If it wasn't for, same thing, when we're talking about Abu Yusuf, you wouldn't know much. If it wasn't for Imam Malik, so whether we're talking about Ibn Sahnun, or whether we're talking about Asad ibn al-Furat, the different scholars from the Madhab Maliki, you would have actually known much about Madhab Maliki. You would have heard that there was a guy named Imam Malik, Imam Dar al-Hijra, and the basically would have probably just been history. Same thing when we're talking about Shafi'i. If it wasn't for Nawawi to actually document that, yeah, there are a couple centuries, 3 centuries between them, but still, at the end of the day, documenting al-Madhab al-Shafi'i. And of course, the list goes on and on. Now, it's really important to mention that. And of course, let's see. You had, of course, Ibn Abi Layla, who himself was actually a Madhab himself. All right. He actually said they're obligatory to wash, and therefore, if you didn't actually do it, and it would be actually considered that your salah and your wudu are invalid if you don't do it. All right. And let's continue right there. The ones to actually say that it was obligatory, they said the word says فَغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ. Here's another evidence. Let's look at it. He said فَغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ. And if it's talking about the face, and of course, right here, the ayah says well, not in this ayah, but in another ayah in Surah Al-Ma'idah, it literally says, and wash your faces. And he said, well, if it's obligating that we would wash the face, then therefore what is inside that is reachable is actually going to be taking the same ruling of what is not reachable in that situation, basically the mouth and the nostrils. I'm going to make the story short. That, it's basically always preferred when there are differences of opinions between scholars on a matter. There is something called al-khuruju min al-khilafi awla. That's actually right there, right? Let's write that, and hopefully, inshallah, we could actually remember that forever when it comes to the differences of opinions. Al-khuruju min al-khilafi awla, which actually means the general default ruling, or at least the general default principle in how we relate with the differences of opinions, is that you always want to try to stay on the safe side. You always want to put the precedence to stay out away from the differences of opinions as supposed to be the general ruling, or at least the preferred thing that you really would want to practice, just to make sure you are not adopting one opinion and leaving the other. Just might as well just stay on the safe side. Let's go for point number 18. So point number 18, he basically says, when, of course, you want to keep in mind that al-Qurtubi is Maliki. So when he says قال علماؤنا, he's actually talking about the Maliki scholars. He said, and our scholars, he said, our scholars, which basically is, and of course, if it's a scholar from a different madhab, he's going to say قال علماؤنا, and what he would mean is really whatever madhab that he comes from. And he said that you basically, in order to do ghusl, and we're here talking about janaba by all means, and of course we talked about janaba and basically reaching the climax, whether due to a wet dream or whether penetration or whether an actual intimacy in that situation, then that would actually be called a state of janaba if basically before taking a shower. So do we have to have the intention before? Or let's just assume that a person was actually innocent of janaba and they basically dived in the pool and came out, but they didn't really have the intention to take a shower, or at least remove the impurity. Does that actually, is that fair? Is that enough to do? Or do they actually have to do more? In other words, do they have to have the intention to remove the reason why they're taking a shower is to remove the impurity, is to actually basically doing it for a ritual purpose and not for a purpose, whether to cleanse a person for non-ritual reasons. Well, let's see what scholars actually said in that regards. So the first one, the Maliki scholars, they said you have to have the intention that you're doing it for a ritual reason, and the evidence to that, he said, because the ayah says حتى تغتسلوا, until you would shower, and he says, well, that actually means that there was an intention that was involved in why you're actually doing it. And that wasn't just the opinion of the Malikis, but that was also the opinion for Shafis as well. And that was also the opinion for the other scholars from the Malikis. And certainly, hold on, let me just, this is distracting me. Let's get that out. Okay, that was also the opinion for the, let's see, Malikis and even Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Now, Ishaq ibn Rahawayh or Rahoya basically was actually the Sheikh of al-Bukhari, believe it or not, and Abu Thawr. They all had their own madhab. It's so sad that Muslims only know four madhab and think that's the end of it. Don't recognize that there's so many madhab out there that really didn't have, I guess, the students that were dedicated to write down those madhahib. And that's really important. You know, sometimes the students can actually do a better job than the teachers themselves. The teacher can sometimes give the ilm, but the students can actually do a better job in teaching it to others. The students can do a better job in documenting, and documentation is extremely important to maintain the ilm. And even if you had the greatest ilm, like Abu Thawr, and even these scholars, you know, this is the Shaykh of al-Bukhari himself. Even if you were that scholarly, if you don't document your ilm, it's going to be forgotten. And if it's forgotten, then basically the reward for your ilm of you still getting the reward for it is basically going to be terminated. That's really sad, because if you want your ilm, even after your death, to continue, you getting basically giving you the deeds for it even after your death, it must be recorded, and certainly must be something that is still giving that that contribution within the society to help the community learn their deed. All right, let's see. So basically, he said these group of scholars, they basically said, no, you do have to have the intention. Well, we're not just talking about major impurity and making the complete ghusl, but this also includes and involves the minor impurity as well. So even when you're making wudu or even tayammum, which is dry ablution, you would basically have to have the intention. What's the evidence? They said, well, simple. We've got this ayah right there in Surah Al-Bayna. It says, وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصًا لَهُ الدِّينَ. Now, the wording of this ayah says when they were only ordered to worship the Lord Almighty with sincerity in basically their rituals or deen in general. Now, here's the thing. They said, ikhlas or sincerity is basically to do a certain behavior with the intention that you are intending to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with it. And therefore, if the person is doing a ritual and they're not actually having the specific intention designated to be for the cause of a ritual, for the cause of a religious reason, then in that situation, their action would not actually be considered as a valid. All right, they removed the contamination, but they were considering that removing the contamination is not enough, but there has to be a certain type of an intention that is involved in the behavior to make sure that this is actually for the cause of a ritual purification, and not just for physical, I guess, hygiene. All right. So let's say, and they also said, well, the hadith says, the Prophet ﷺ actually says, and now you want to keep in mind, this hadith is actually the highest level of authenticity. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. All the actions are going to be basically their accountability. In other words, you're going to be held accountable for any action that you do based on the intention that you had intended it for, and therefore the action is going to depend on the intention, and therefore it's not enough to engage in any action with your intention not being for the right cause. Okay, now here's the thing. Well, not all scholars actually agreed on that. So you've got al-Awza'i and al-Hasan. Now, al-Awza'i, it's so sad al-Awza'i didn't actually get his right. He was from Lebanon, and yeah, and I think it's really important to actually do some classes. Man, we got to do those classes on these scholars and let you get to know each and every single scholar. Yeah, that's something that, inshallah, I'm excited to do. I absolutely love biographies, you know, especially when you're talking about these scholars, like where they lived, what they contributed in, and the science that they had done, and how they studied. I think one of the most scholars that really fascinate me was Nawawi. We're going to talk about him later on. Nawawi and Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, not because they're both Shafi'i madhab, but I think the the life that they had lived was really like when you look at Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, he actually lost 9 kids, 9 children. Not easy. You would think that these people had everything easy in their life. When you look at Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, lost 9 children, that's a trauma after trauma, a trauma after trauma, 9 children. One of his children reached his 10th year birthday, and then he was really happy about, yeah, he's like, he survived that long, but then died a couple of days later. And he was really, really traumatized from all of that. So these people went through a lot. It wasn't an easy thing. Nawawi was actually going through yes, poverty was one main thing, but also physical things, and where he actually died at age 45. So, yes, we don't have a complete diagnosis of why, or what really happened. When you look at Shafi'i, died at 45 as well. So Ibn Rajab. So you have a number of different scholars that actually died at a young age, yet had left behind a huge legacy, that I think it's important to really study these scholars and see what legacy that they had left behind, and how we can learn from that, and how these people, they didn't necessarily have it as like where ilm, it was like put on a golden plate, and all they needed to do was just get it out there, and it was so easy. No, it wasn't actually easy. Let's continue. So these two scholars, al-Awza'i and al-Hasan, they basically said, well, it's enough to do wudu or even tayammum, even if you didn't have the intention. And they said for the intention, well, what they regarded, they were like, well, anyways, when a person is actually doing it, the whole cause, the whole object for the that washing is not the intention that's going to change everything. Yes, ikhlas, that's one piece of it, but it's all about removing the contamination. If the person removed the contamination well and the object was done, the niyyah is, or the intention, doesn't really change. The truth of the matter is that this person is actually right now basically pure and basically clean because they removed all the impurity. So having the intention doesn't change. The truth of the matter is that they basically are they're basically pure, and there's no impurity involved. So for Abu Hanifa, he really had a rather interesting one. He said, well, every single purification that involves water, it's enough and it should suffice even if you didn't have the intention. Yet, if you're actually doing tayammum, he regarded that that's a different thing. Why? He said, well, because technically you didn't really remove the impurity. The impurity is still there. So, therefore, in order for you to actually be prepared for a ritual practice that was supposed to involve purification, but then you didn't really have the ability to remove it technically, but you kind of removed it with your intention. And that's why for Abu Hanifa, he said, you know what, I want you to look into this, in where if you're doing tayammum, that has to have the intention coming along with it, because technically you didn't really remove the impurity. The impurity is still there. But for any other purification that involves water, it's enough to have the water cleansing you, because the whole object was really to remove the impurity. It's really interesting. No, they actually both have strong strong opinions. They actually have strong evidence. Let's see this one. So the question is, so what is the preponderant? What should we regard that? Well, I laid out the evidences for you, and now that you can see the evidences, I'll let you decide. Okay, let's see the other one. How much water is enough to wash with? How much water should we be using? Is there a limit to the amount? I mean, right now during our times, it's quite easy to just, just under the shower, turn it on, blah, 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 and you're all done. All right. But at that time, the scarcity of water was actually affecting them. And of course, talking about the minimum amount was something really important, because when you were talking about the minimum amount, it was, is that supposed to be enough? Well, the reason for it is because, of course, people's body sizes vary, but they actually wanted to say, well, we're talking about a minimum amount that we are assuming that was enough to cleanse that impurity. Let's see right here. So Malik ibn Shihab, ibn Zubayr, Urwa ibn Zubayr. Oh man, I wish I can go in details about him. Anyhow, and Aisha, man, you guys, I want you to go back to Urwa ibn Zubayr and actually read about him later on, not now. Okay, very important, very, very important figure. Okay, they basically said that the Prophet ﷺ used to shower in a utensil, and it was, they basically said in al-faraq, al-faraq, and of course, or al-faruq. Okay, so taharrak ra'hu, so here al-faraq, and basically al-faraq, and basically that is, according to the Hanafis, they basically said it's 6.5 kilos or kilograms. And according to the majority, they basically said 6.12, well, 6.12, 6.12 kilos. So that would be how many, if we're talking about, I don't know, that how many ounces is that? Maybe you could do your homework and actually see. So in the end is that he was basically washing with a couple gallons right there. If we were to look at, yeah, that would be interesting. So please help me. Maybe we could actually see right there and see. And I'm just gonna actually see. So 6.5. Okay, we're gonna see it right here. 6.5 kilos of water. Okay. And we're gonna see how many gallons it is. Okay. 6.5 kilos of water is equivalent to 1.72 gallons. That's what it's saying. 1.72 gallons. That wasn't a lot. That's a small amount. Okay. All right. Let's see. So he was basically, that's what did we say? So basically a gallon and a half almost to shower all the body. All right. So that tells you don't really need to spend a lot of water, and that should be enough to actually do al-faraq, and basically that amount. Let's see. So here, Anas ibn Malik, he basically said al-faraq. Here they go into a debate whether how much is really al-faraq. Let's see. So here, Anas ibn Malik said that the Prophet ﷺ used to do wudu in al-mud, which is 544 grams. Okay, so basically 544 grams, and he would wash and bathe with 2.5 liters. You could see that's a different amount than what was mentioned up here. Okay, that's a different amount, and you'd see. And يغتسل بخمسة مكاكيك or يتوضأ بمكوك. In other words, this is basically to say that he was making wudu in 4.125 liters. So let's see how many ounces that is, right? Let's see. So we're looking at 4.8 liters. Okay. All right, so 4.8 liters in ounces. We're talking about water right there, if that's what he was doing wudu with. And in that situation, well, I mean, the amount is not really that much. So it's here 162 ounces. That's a lot. Am I doing this? Are we doing this right? 162 ounces, that's a lot. We could say the variant numbers. Am I doing this right? Okay, somebody help me. All right, so in the end, you could see one, I think what's important to say is that you could actually have these numbers actually vary. Well, it depends on who is actually witnessing the situation. And that's why it wasn't literally that this much. They would have these different pictures, all right, different pictures and different utensils, and they would actually do wudu with it. So the whole object is to remove the impurity, and that's why he basically, and I love this quote right here. Let's see this quote. He said, وهذه الأحاديث تدل على استحباب تقليل الماء من غير كيل ولا وزن يأخذ منه الإنسان بقدر ما يكفي ولا يكثر منه فإن الإكثار منه سرف. That's the whole object, and he just summarized it. He said all these hadith would actually tell us that it is best to reduce the water, or without even having a specific weight or even a specific volume, and you're just going to take what is needed, and without putting over or without overusing, because you don't want to basically involve in overusage. In other words, in overusage, because that is hated in Islam. But at the end of the day, it's really what is necessary. In other words, you're just going to continue the whole object. The whole object is basically to wash the area regardless of the amount. Just make sure you're not exaggerating the amount needed for your wudu. Let's see this ayah. وَإِن كُنتُم مَرْضَىٰ وَعَلَىٰ سَفَرٍ أَوْ جَاءَ أَحَدٌ مِّنكُم مِّنَ الْغَائِطِ أَوْ لَامَسْتُمُ النِّسَاءَ فَلَمْ تَجِدُوا مَاءً فَتَيَمَّمُوا صَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا فامسحوا بوجوهكم وأيديكم. So this ayah is actually related to this one. Okay. وإن كنتم مرضى. Here we go. وإن كنتم مرضى. So it's related to the previous one. Let's look into it. If you were ill, or if you were on a journey, or if any of you were to come from al-Gha'at. Now here's one thing. The word al-Gha'at is actually to mean a low area. We're going to talk about that in just a bit. Or if you were to touch women and you did not have water, then use tayammum as your alternative to washing. So this is the only ayah in the Quran that actually talks about tayammum. What is tayammum? So basically tayammum is when you don't have water. Or is it when you don't have water? We're going to go in detail in just a bit. Or is it that the person is supposed to be on a journey? Do they have to be on a journey? Or can they be ill too? Can they use this dry wudu? And what it means to dry wudu, you're basically putting your hand on substances that don't burn from fire, basically earth-based substances, soil, rocks, sand, earth-based substances. And we're not talking about earth-based to mean plants. We're talking about the actual earth. Okay. And you're going to use that as an alternative by basically putting your hand on it, and you're getting your hands clean, just your palms basically, and also your face. Are you going to use one strike, two strikes? We're going to get to that in just a bit, inshallah. All right. So the reason why this ayah was revealed, so this portion of it, now I want you to remember this ayah, you're reading it right now as one complete ayah, but just this portion of it, maybe we could actually, just lay it out right here, just this portion of it from here, okay, all the way to here, okay, was actually revealed at a different time compared to from here to here. You see it? So even the part of the ayah was actually revealed at a different time. All right. You see it right now coherent, and you see it right in front of you, but it was actually at different times. They were actually revealed at different periods, and each one is actually at a different time and a different period, and certainly relating to a different context. Let's see the context of this ayah and see what happened. So this, what happened was during the Battle of al-Muraysiyah. Okay, let me tell you a little bit, or sometimes al-Muraysiyah and Bani al-Mustaliq, it actually is for the same event. Bani al-Mustaliq, they basically had prepared to attack the Muslims. The Prophet ﷺ and Bani al-Mustaliq were actually quite far, so they were closer to Syria than actually uh, you what you would actually think. So they were in the northern part of what is called today Saudi Arabia, okay, the northern part, and they were really prepared to attack the Muslims. So the Prophet ﷺ and went to al-Muraysiyah and or of course al-Mustaliq are basically the people that lived near al-Muraysiyah. And what happened was there were a couple incidents that happened during that time, really wasn't just one. One of them was Sayyida Aisha's necklace actually right there getting lost. Okay. So she basically was on her camel. Okay. She is not recognized that she had um, stayed behind. So her necklace falls. She goes to look for it. And then the whole army goes, leave her behind. And then of course, later on, Safwan ibn al-Mu'attal, basically, who was supposed to be the Sahabi that was staying behind because of his sleep disorder, really. So his sleep disorder, the Prophet ﷺ puts him to be the person that would come later on to make sure that everyone is basically with with the rest of the army and no one is left behind. Well, the person that was left behind is Sayyida Aisha, and it wasn't until he had actually come. Now, later on, of course, we're talking about Sayyida Aisha losing her necklace, and then you basically had uh, the Prophet ﷺ actually sent certain people to actually look for it. This is, if it was today, the man would basically go so angry and it's like, why did you lose it, etc., and probably lash out on his wife. But you could see the Prophet ﷺ is so romantic, so kind, so merciful. He didn't lash out on his Sayyidah Aisha. He just basically sent men to actually look for it. All right, let's see. So basically, this necklace. Well, scholars had differences of opinions on whether it was for Sayyidah Aisha or whether for Asma. It was Asma's, but then she basically gave it for Sayyidah Aisha to basically borrow. All right, so the Prophet ﷺ had sent these men to basically, let's say, this is literally what it says. The Prophet ﷺ had actually sent men to fetch and actually get this necklace. And when it was Salah time, and they didn't have enough water for wudu, so the Prophet ﷺ actually sent them, and they didn't have enough water for wudu. They didn't actually have all the different, I guess, necessary things that to take along, and they didn't have enough water. So they basically made salah without even any wudu. So that's when that ayah was revealed. This portion of that ayah was actually revealed when these guys were actually sent. They didn't know what to do, and that's when basically the ayah in regards to wudu, in regards to tayammum, was basically revealed in order to teach us how do we relate with washing when there is no water. All right, so we're just going to go really quick. All right, and where did they find the necklace? I guess that's important. They found it under this camel. It was actually sitting on it. All right, and he basically, look at see. وجاء في البخاري أن الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم وجده. Oh, in Sahih al-Bukhari, it was the Prophet ﷺ that actually found it, but said at the end of the day, it can be attributed that someone found it, but when it's that person basically sent someone to find it. Regardless of what happened at the end of the day, of course, we know that that the Prophet ﷺ had sent two men, or at least some men, to help in finding that necklace. And what another thing that happened, here's another incident. Some actually said it wasn't during, say, the Aisha's necklace. that this ayah was revealed? They said no. It was actually for the sake of another reason, which is when the Sahaba, they basically were wounded, and of course, getting wounded, and some of them were actually getting, of course, their men, young men, getting wet dreams in that situation, being far away from their wives, and of course, they've been probably gone for a couple of weeks, and then they came to the Prophet ﷺ, complained to the Prophet ﷺ because there was a scarcity of water, they were in a state of janaba, and they weren't really sure what to do. So that's when, even though they basically had all these wounds, so that's when that ayah basically was revealed in order to clarify for them the ruling when they are in such situations in the scarcity of water. All right. Now, of course, they do debate whether Bani al-Mustaliq or was it Muraysiyah, and whether it's the same battle or whether it's two different battles. In the end, is that, to make the story short, you could see uh, that the whole idea is that they had a scarcity of water and they were away from Medina, and that they didn't have an alternative. So should they be praying without wudu, or should they be doing that tayammum? Let's continue right there. So Abu Umar, who's Abu Umar? Just to give you an idea about Abu Umar, his name is Ibn Abdul Barr. That's another name for him. Abu Umar is a Maliki scholar, he was named Hafid al-Maghrib, and he basically said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the ayah of tayammum, and even had mentioned the ayah in regards to wudu in Surah Al-Ma'idah, and even the ayah in Surah Nisa, and he said, well, this one right here is Madani Surah, and the ayah in Surah Al-Ma'idah, ayah number 6 in Surah Al-Ma'idah, that talks about the details of what we're supposed to be doing in wudu. They said they both basically complement and they both complete one another. So basically, what acts as an alternative, that's what he wanted to say. If tayammum is an alternative for these circumstances, then tayammum is going to be an alternative for the other circumstances that we would basically are required to do wudu, but we don't have the means to it, and therefore they regarded that tayammum would be the alternative in a general situation when water is not available. Let's go right here. He said, point number 21. See, we're moving ahead, right? He said, as for the word marda, which word is that right there? وَإِن كُنتُم marda. He said, المرض عبارة عن خروج البدن عن حد الاعتدال والاعتياد. So what is an illness? So he basically wanted to define what an illness means and what it means to be an ill person. He said it's basically when the body goes out of the basically the ordinary, and of course the ordinary, or even what is considered basically the healthy situation. Okay, so if a person is going through some kind of a disability or some kind of a disruption in what the process of their body, and therefore they basically go through some kind of a disability, some kind of a disruption in the process of how their body is supposed to function, then in that situation, that's actually considered an illness. And he said there are two kinds of illnesses. You've got the one that is a major illness and a minor illness, in where the major illness is when a person is basically fearful of something going as far as getting fatal. So such as maybe cold water, or probably an illness in where they would fear probably the loss of certain limbs, or probably the loss of certain body organs probably getting harmed. So in that situation, they would actually do tayammum as agreed upon between scholars. So even if they had the water, okay, so, well, hold on, let's do this one again. So here, this is the illness. If the person feared that by using water, okay, so يخاف الموت لبرد الماء. Okay, they feared death because water was actually too cold. They couldn't they couldn't heat up the water. So in that situation, okay, they couldn't use water. So in that situation, they would actually do tayammum as agreed upon between scholars. But here's an exception. Some scholars, they basically said no, he would have to wash even if he dies. What? Even if he dies? Right. Yeah, that's a fiqh opinion, right? So yeah, even if you're gonna die, you've got no way out. You have to you have to wash. This is according to this opinion. But he basically responded, he said, and that is to be rejected. What rejects it is basically this ayah. The ayah says, وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ. The ayah in ayah number 78 in Surah Al-Hajj literally says that the Lord Almighty had not made the deen or religion in general to be bringing in a burden. In other words, if the burden itself was to be something that the religion was there to eliminate, then to put a person in a circumstance that is even worse than a burden, such as death, is actually definitely not the object for the religion. Because the ayah also says, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ, and do not kill yourselves, because in general, killing yourself is actually impermissible, whether you are killing yourself to do wudu or whether you're killing yourself because you're just angry at life and decided to commit suicide. Both are actually haram, and definitely Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not ask you whether you're literally holding, I don't know, a piece of I don't know, some knife and literally, stabbing yourself with it, or whether you use a method in where you know that due to an illness, or let's say you had severe burns, and you know that by using water, you're basically letting these burns continue, and probably the healing process is going to probably get longer, and probably the healing process is probably going to lead these wounds to actually get into an infection, and then eventually, of course, you're going to die. So according to these scholars, it's okay, go ahead and die. But according to it's really ironic, but you want to keep in mind, there are some opinions out there that would really be so ironic. So you've got these scholars, they were like, absolutely not. And here's our evidence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't ask you to harm yourself. All right, let's see another opinion, or let's see another evidence. And they said, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِن كُنتُم مَرْضَىٰ أَوْ عَلَىٰ سَفَرٍ. So that is, if a person was basically wounded, so there we go, this actually puts them within the category of illness. So illness doesn't have to be internal, but can also be external as well, in where a wound, or even if there's pus or probably some form of measles, then in that situation, if they feared that if they were to use water, or of course they had these, jadari was basically, al-judari is basically some form, they've got all these different pimples, or all these different openings in their on their body, and then if they were to actually use water, that might actually get them infected. So in that situation, they would actually use water. Let's see Sa'id ibn Jubayr. Sa'id ibn Jubayr, just an idea about him, he was actually killed, assassinated, literally. Well, I mean, I don't know what we executed. That would be more proper, by Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi, and he regretted bad. He regretted bad. Okay, so he basically said that Ibn Abbas had mentioned the person that is ill was given the permissibility to do tayammum by using Sa'id. What is Sa'id? Sa'id, yes, it's a city in Egypt, but this has nothing to do with that city in Egypt. Sa'id is basically any soil or any substance that is earth-based. So whether we're talking about earth, whether we're talking about soil, well, earth soil, or whether we're talking about sand, or perhaps talking about rocks, all of that is basically considered sa'id. Let's see, what's the evidence on that? Well, they said, we've got an evidence. Amr ibn al-As, who was at the time only 4 months Muslim. What happened was that the Prophet ﷺ, mind this, new Muslims, please check this out. Amr ibn al-As was only 4 months Muslim, but the Prophet ﷺ saw in him a leader, and he actually sent him to lead in the battle of that Salasil. Amr ibn al-As, he basically goes in a state of janaba, but he wasn't actually capable. It seems like he had maybe an issue with maybe because it was too cold, severe cold, and if he were to take a shower, he would basically probably get into a flu and a severe flu. So what Hamd ibn al-As did, he basically did his own tayammum. The Sahaba objected. They were like, you're doing tayammum for what? Why would you do tayammum? It was like, well, it's too cold for me to take a shower right now. And I'm going to get into a flu and probably get sick and probably get all these fevers. So you could see right there, number 6, and Amr ibn al-As, even though, and here's the thing, Amr ibn al-As, remember, he was only 4 months old at the time, but the Prophet sends him as a leader on a battle. But Amr ibn al-As is a very smart man. So he knew that the object of fiqh, the object of Islam, is to give healing to people and not to get them ill. So therefore, he did his own fiqh and know that by the object of Islam to cure and to give people healing, that there's no way that Islam would actually make it obligatory for him to take a shower during the winter and probably get sick. Let's see, if the illness was slight, but you feared that the illness might actually get prolonged or probably would slow down the process of healing for that situation. Scholars unanimously agreed that a person can actually do tayammum. All right, and let's see some more right there. So, and of course, al-Qurtubi here says, and I say, al-Badri, where's Baja? Where's Baja? Who knows? Baja is actually a city in Tunisia. My kids actually originally come from Baja. Yeah, because my husband comes from Baja, originally at least, but lived in the city of Tunisia. But anyhow, so al-Badri is basically a Maliki scholar, and his name is not al-Badri. His name is not al-Badri, but he was attributed to the city that he comes from. Beautiful city. I only saw it on YouTube. All right. Al-Qadi Abu al-Hasan basically al-Badri said there are differences of opinions on whether that is true, on whether if a person was fearful of prolonging the healing process, on whether they can do tayammum or not. Let's see this one. So if a person were to fear, for example, a flu or probably fever or probably prolonging the illness, and in that situation, they can actually do tayammum even if there is water. Okay, of course, right now it's completely different during our times, but we're here laying out the different circumstances that people might actually be in. Right now, I mean, it's really easy to actually have hot water, but people have different circumstances. So if you do have accessible hot water, make sure you always thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it, because not everyone has hot water. And I'll tell you, I used to give durus in al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and not having hot water available at the time, at least, was also causing a lot of marital problems, because of course that's going to require heating up the water and probably getting the whole bathroom ready and all of these different things. And it becomes a whole drama and a whole issue between the husband and the wife in those circumstances where the wife is saying, hey, that's going to basically, disrupt my sleep and all of that, and becomes a whole issue. Okay. Shafi'i said it is not permissible to do tayammum when there's actually water right there, unless they basically feared of exacerbating the pains, or at least, increasing the pains. And of course, probably having some kind of exacerbating the body and probably having some more deterioration in the person's health. Isn't that the same thing? Well, that's exactly what the previous ones had said. Maybe he wanted to word it differently. Okay. Ibn al-Arabi, who is Maliki, he basically said, قال الشافعي. Now, we could have just went to Shafi'i himself. Why are you going Ibn al-Arabi to quote on Shafi'i? Okay, let's see. Did they actually go? So it's really strange how the person that basically went over this book and did all these footnotes didn't actually go to the Shafi'i himself and actually see whether it was really quoted off of Shafi'i. So that's a problem in doing all of that. They should have actually went to Shafi'i and the books of Shafi'i to see what they had said upon Shafi'i, rather than let Ibn al-Arabi quote on Shafi'i. Those are two different madhahib. Ibn al-Arabi is Maliki. Shafi'i, well, of course, is the founder for madhab Shafi'i. Okay, let's see. He basically said it is not permissible for an ill person if they fear deterioration in their health, because this fear is not something that they could guarantee. In other words, it's not final. It's not a complete determination. The person is not really sure. And therefore, to actually base the ruling of something that you are in doubt and not sure of is basically living in something that you are not definitive in doing. And basically, and he said in that situation, only if the person would be really sure. It's like if I were to use water, let's say experts would say, or you would know that if I were to use water on such type of, let's say, severe burns, then yes, for sure it's going to get infected. But if we're talking about a burn in where it's a slight burn, we're not really sure. We don't see pus. It's not a 2nd degree, 3rd degree, etc. But we're not really sure. But you're like, if I were to use burn, I can feel sometimes it's a burning sensation when I were to use water, but it's not really severe. So that's when Shafi'i would actually then have, this difference of opinion on whether this really is a considerable reason or not, depending on are we really serious that we're going to be seeing deterioration, or here really putting doubt in place. To make the story short, okay, he said, okay, well, to make the story short, let's go actually, hold on, let me see, do this. Right, so basically what he wanted to say, let's make the story short. He said in this hadith, which is the hadith about Amr al-As, when Amr al-As had a wet dream on a cold night in the battle that is Salasil, and he feared that if he were to actually take a shower, that he would get sick. So he basically did tayammum. He basically not only did tayammum, but he even led the prayer for all the group that he was with for the Fajr prayer. They went to the Prophet ﷺ and they said, Amr, you actually prayed and led the prayer on, and you were the Imam with your friends, basically, when you were in a state of janaba. And basically the Prophet ﷺ, now here, the Prophet ﷺ was questioning, Amr, why would you do that? And then he said, well, I basically heard Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say, do not kill yourselves, for the Lord Almighty is all merciful on you. The Prophet ﷺ laughed and he didn't say anything about it. So the Prophet ﷺ wasn't necessarily here questioning or interrogating Amr. He was more, I guess, here teasing Amr And here I'm responded, well, I got this from the Quran itself. I didn't make up anything. And here Al-Qurtubi said, well, what this would indicate is that it is permissible to do tayammum when the person is in fear, even if they're not sure that their health would deteriorate, even if they're not sure, just being fearful that, well, this might affect. Let's give an example. Maybe a couple weeks ago, I had a girl actually tell me that she had severe eczema. And the severe eczema, her dermatologist told her that with the severe eczema, I guess every time she would use water, her body would start, basically these, I don't know, these areas of skin irritation would get worse, and that the water would basically make it get crack more, and that she would start cracking more, and etc. So in that situation, if you're talking about a complete illness like that, even if water is available, and for sure water is available, but with using water, basically not recommended for probably once or twice or etc., then in that situation, they can use tayammum as an alternative, even if they feared for their health, even if we don't have a yaqeen, which basically a doctor's prescription. Do we have to have a doctor's prescription actually tell us, yeah, this eczema, if you use too much water, if you wash too many times, then for sure you're going to prolong the process of your healing. So in that situation, can she actually say, well, I actually tried using water and I did recognize that the cracking was more, and I fear that if this is going to be cracking more and getting more and more of that eczema, then that might actually get me into prolonging the stages of healing or treatment. So in that situation, even if she doesn't have a doctor prescribing that as a yaqeen, a definitive answer, we can actually consider her own fear, okay, her own fear for the healing process, because of her basically going through that experience of seeing that every time I would make wudu for every salah, I was recognizing that my eczema was actually getting worse, and decided that she wants to self-diagnose in that situation and say, well, I recognize that the water was making my flares actually get worse, and therefore decided on her own to actually do tayammum. This is a considerable opinion. You could see it right there. And same thing, of course, when we're talking about other things as well. Same thing when maybe I don't want to get into uh, other topics as well, and then confuse you all. All right. So in that situation, you could say whether the person was in a state of janaba or whether they were on a journey they couldn't find water, or the water was scarce, that they could actually do tayammum. Let's see another story. So here the Sahaba Jabir Abdullah, he said, we were out on a journey and a man basically got struck with a rock. This rock hurt his head severely. And then, ironically, in this situation, he basically went through a wet dream. And then he came to his friends and the Sahaba, basically his friends, and they said, and he basically asked, do you find that I have the permission to do tayammum? So they said, we don't actually find that you have the permission to do tayammum when you have access to water. So he took a shower because he wanted to remove that Janaba state situation, and he died. So when they came to the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ was asked, and the Prophet ﷺ responded, they killed him. قَتَلَهُمُ They killed him. And in other words, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hold them accountable. And he said, أَلَّا سَأَلُوا إِذْ لَمْ يَعْلَمُوا. They were supposed to be asking when they didn't know. They should have actually asked. فَإِنَّمَا شِفَاءُ الْعِيِّ السُّؤَالِ. The basically the treatment for a person that is ill is basically to ask, seek, rather than go in a situation where you've caused the person to basically get his wounds infected, and that infection affected them and they basically died as a result. And he said, إنما يكفيه أن يتيمم ويعصر أو يعصب. So he said, it is enough for him to basically do tayammum and basically cover the wound with a certain basically cloth, or the, what do they call that, gauze, and then they would wipe over that gauze and basically wash the rest of the body. So what does that mean? If one particular area you're not capable of washing it, so in that situation you would wash the rest of the areas, but on that particular wound or that particular area that basically cannot touch water, you can put like a gauze if that's what you're supposed to put. But if you're not supposed to, and they told you that it's supposed to be uncovered and that you're just going to leave it like that, but just make sure water doesn't touch it in that situation, just leave it like that. Don't even let water touch it. That's absolutely fine. Wash the other organs or whatever the other pieces of it need to be washed, at least in your body. And of course, right now you can actually get these aiding things where you could even find on Amazon. Let's say your leg is not supposed to be touched by water. They'll basically have a certain kind of like a certain thing that you can put your leg in, and it would basically prevent the water from going inside your wound or your leg or your body or whatever it is. But that's sometimes easier said than done. It depends on the situation and the circumstances that you're in. So not always would you find an Amazon actually having your stuff ready for you that easily. All right, let's move on really quick. So when we're speaking about, let's see this one, when we're speaking about illness, let's see, Dawood said everyone what kind of an illness? Are we talking about skin illnesses? Are we talking about what kind of illness? So he said basically everything that is considered an illness and water prolongs the illness, then in that situation they're permitted to do tayammum, okay, if water is involved. So basically we're talking about whether skin diseases, whether we're talking about a wound, whether we're talking about any illness where water basically should not be touching the body, can actually be considered. So where did he get that from? Because the ayah says وَإِن كُنْتُمْ مَرْضَى. So basically the ambiguity, or at least the unidentification, to be exact rather than ambiguity, the unidentification in the word marda basically tells us that it's not specifying a specific illness. It's not specifying a specific illness, as long as using the water can actually harm the person, regardless of what type of illness it is. If water is something that they're supposed to be staying away from, then in that situation, they are considered to fall within the category of ill. Right there. Let's move on. أو على سفر. Hey, we did a good job. We passed وإن كنتم مرضى. أو على سفر. What is safar? So safar basically is going on a journey. So in that situation, the person on a journey, because they're on a journey, whether the journey is long or whether the journey was short, in circumstances where the water is scarce or not accessible, they don't necessarily have to shorten the prayer. So it has nothing to do, this is irrelevant. Shortening the prayer is irrelevant. This is talking about the water being accessible or not. According to the Maliki, the majority of scholars, they basically said as long as they're on a journey, they don't have enough water, or at least they don't have water at all. In that situation, regardless of whether you can shorten the prayer or not, this is irrelevant. They don't have water, they can actually do tayammum. Yet other scholars, they basically said, no, tayammum is not in short journeys, but it can only happen in long journeys when those specific long journeys are long enough for a person to actually shorten the prayer. Well, wait a minute. How far is a long and a short journey? So some scholars, they said a long journey that would basically make shortening prayers applicable would be, first opinion, 81 kilometers. Second opinion has nothing to do with how many kilometers, as long as within that time they consider it that they're number one, regional I guess evaluation, let's call it that way. So if the person is outside the region, then in that situation, they're basically considered that they had gotten out of their area, and therefore now they're considered as travelers. The second opinion, they said it's not an issue of region, because during our times, you can actually travel a 2 hour walk, or let's not do the walk, but a 2 hour flight would really be, if we were to walk, that would probably take us 6 months to walk, or 3 months to walk. Yeah, 3 months almost to walk. But let's ask right there, how long would it take you, right? Let's see. How long would it take to walk? What would take 2 hours to fly? Okay, let's see, how long? That would be really interesting, right? So here it says it's impossible to actually do that. Okay, 2 hours, so it's 500 miles per hour. So walking time would be 250 hours. Is that right? 250 hours? So 250 hours, all right, would actually, okay, average speed, flight speed. Okay, so, all right. So in that situation, that's at a speed of 4 miles per hour. Okay, whatever. Now, one thing is that the scholars actually had differences of opinions in defining how much is travel. All right. Why? Because the other scholars, they said it has nothing to do with just distance. We don't actually have a particular distance that we can measure, that the Prophet ﷺ, once he got out of a certain, a certain area or a certain distance, that's when the Prophet ﷺ actually said, okay, here's what marks as a new place, or this is the number of distance. And that was going to be the area that, or the distance that we're going to be determining as the distance that permits shortening the prayer. So what did they say? So they said, no, it really depends on the time and what is known at that time. So at our times, a 20-minute drive, or a half an hour drive, or even 40-minute drive, it's not considered a travel, because a 40-minute drive, you're still within the area of your city. But once you go out of that city, like an hour, 2 hour drive, that's when that would be considered a travel. But again, that's all approximate, because we don't actually have this starting point where the Prophet ﷺ says, well, this is the limit, this is the number. So that's why they actually went into these differences of opinions in that situation. All right. So the majority of the scholars in general had actually considered, and actually here he says, أجمع العلماء على جواز التيمم. So all scholars agreed that a person in a journey, on a journey, that they can do tayammum, but they had differences of opinions on a person whether they can do tayammum if they're actually residents in a country. Malik and his friends, they basically said tayammum for a resident and even for a person on a journey is permissible regardless if they don't have water. If they don't have water, خلاص, they could actually go for tayammum. So Shafi, on the other hand, he basically regarded that no, tayammum is only for a person, during a travel, or they were fearful for their health. And of course, or person, okay, a person basically only in these two categories. Let's see. That's a very, look at this opinion right there. Shafi'i said, if there's no water and the person is a resident, and they feared that by the time they would heat the water, that the time is going to go up. Let's give an example. So let's say the person wants to pray Fajr, but there's only 5 minutes to pray Fajr left, or probably 10 minutes, and the person were to heat the water. All right, where if the person were to heat the water, it's going to take almost 20 minutes to heat, or 25 minutes to heat. And they only have 5 minutes left of Fajr. Should they do tayammum? According to Shafi'i, yes. According to Shafi'i, yes. You have to do you can do tayammum because there's not enough time for you to heat the water. Okay. And for Abu Yusuf, who's basically Yaqub ibn Ibrahim, and Zufar, who basically comes from a Hanafi madhab, they said, no, you cannot do tayammum if you're a resident, whether because time is running out or whether because you are ill. There's no tayammum. There's no tayammum in for a person that is a resident at all. That tayammum is only for, just lay those out. So why did they even have differences of opinions? Isn't it too clear? Isn't the ayah too clear? So basically said, well, the reason for the differences of opinions is because they had differences of opinions in understanding the ayah. So with the first group, they basically said, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned right here, and if you are ill or if you're on a journey, and of course, basically in that situation, okay, then you could not find water, then that's when you're going to take the alternative to actually go for tayammum. And here he said, as for, of course, the other ones, they basically said, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically had made tayammum as an alternative for somebody that is ill or on a journey, and therefore it's only going to be exclusive for these two people, a person that is ill and a person that is on a journey. So therefore this is not to basically include a person that is not traveling. So this is just an idea. All right, we will actually pause right here. There's so much to say. We'll just end it with this one. So al-Qurtubi says, and from the evidence that it is permissible to actually do tayammum even when you're when you're a resident, when you fear that the timing of salah will pass, is basically these evidence. The evidence, basically, he said, well, number one, the ayah says, if any of you were to come from the low areas. Now, low areas are basically the areas that were basically kind of like small hills, where that was considered the public bathrooms. That's where they would go and do their nature, call nature, and do it there, because that was away from the eyes of people, away from the city, so that they would go to those areas. Okay. And basically he says right there, and this is what our friends, which are the Malikis, that you can actually do tayammum even if you are in a resident basically, and you would not redo your salah if you had water, and basically if you had already done the salah, you don't redo your salah. And what's the evidence? He said, well, we've got the evidence right there. The Prophet ﷺ, a man came to the Prophet ﷺ when he was near Bir Jamal, when he was near a well that was called Jamal. And a man comes to the Prophet ﷺ, and then he says, Salamu alaikum. But the Prophet ﷺ didn't respond until he got to a wall, and then he wiped his face and his hands, and then he said, Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. And then he responded, he said, what prevented me from responding to your salam is because I was not in a state of tahara. So what did he was a resident, and what did he do? He was a resident, and he basically did his tahara on a wall, which is basically a stone, made of stone. So we'll leave it right there, inshallah. And if there are any questions, can I give salams before you start recording? Yeah, hayallah. Go ahead, my dear. Let's see. Hold on. Let me allow you to unmute yourself. Go ahead, my dear. Ayan, are you there? Ayan, did she go? Oh no, poor thing. Oh, I think, oh dear. I think she left. Oh, sorry about that. What about during winter storm, the power outage? Can you do tayammum? Absolutely, dear. That's what we're saying. That the whole conversation is about those situations. So you've got a winter storm, okay? The power outage, and you're wondering whether you can do tayammum. So according to, let's see, a number of different scholars that we had mentioned here. So let's see, basically, even if you had the water, okay, and you're a resident, but it's hard for you to actually heat the water, then in that situation, you can just do tayammum. Exactly. But the power outage doesn't stop the water, does it? It doesn't stop the water. But let's say the water was too cold and there was there was a power outage. If you were to actually use the really cold water, and yeah, you might actually get frostbite, and who knows what's going to happen. So in that situation, or probably get too cold. So yes, you certainly can do tayammum. So any other questions? This is it. Inshallah, we will see you all. Was it Wednesday? No, Tuesday. Oh, hold on. What day was it? Because guess what? We're gonna do Monday. Hold on, let me see. What did Monday. Good job. So it's Monday your time, but Tuesday. Remember, me being in Malaysia, I'm in the future. So Tuesday your time, or Tuesday my time, Monday your time. So yeah, it is 11:44 a.m. here in Malaysia, Saturday. We are Saturday morning, or Saturday noon, I should say. The weather outside is probably 82 degrees, maybe something like that. So yes, I guess I'm just trying to get the Minnesotans to kind of feel jealous, perhaps. Okay, this is it. So we'll see you all next week, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'll stop the recording, but I'll stay here.